Welcome back. We've already had the chairman or the chair of the IoT Security Foundation. We now have the managing director of the IoT Security Foundation. So day's going very well. I think we're both fairly tired now, but it's great to have you. Honestly, it's been a pleasure. But look, rather than me introduce you, there's no better to introduce you than yourself. So give us a little bit of a background, John. Who are you? How you ended up the MD of the IoT Security Foundation, and why you're here, effectively.
Yeah, well, as you said, so my name is John Moor. I am the Managing Director of the IoT Security Foundation.
Yep.
I'm also co-founder, and I'm a co-founder with a bunch of people that we got originally to help us set the foundation up on our steering board.
Yeah.
So that's probably about 11 to 12 people. When people ask me to introduce myself, I usually hit them with I'm actually, the way I describe myself, what I identify with, if you like, is an expired embedded systems engineer. So back in the day,
Expired.
I'm expired. It's been a long time now since I've actually been hands-on. But once upon a time, I was a techie. I was there doing microprocessor-based design, so embedded systems. But it's been a long time, and things have moved on. And with that, technology's obviously moved on. So this morning when I opened up, I was talking about some of the issues that we were facing. And I gave a very coarse history about how, back maybe 50 years ago, when we used to have computers which would occupy a big room, and I even said, today we would describe them as air-gapped, but air-gapped wasn't the thing then because we didn't have connected computers at that point. But we all know the story. We had a computer on every desk, and of course there's been miniaturization, and so what we have now is pervasive compute, which is embedded into pretty much everything. Now, that's kind of one trend. Certainly I've seen that in my career. But I think that the big things for me about the issues that we're facing today, and maybe I'm jumping ahead of the question, but there's a couple of things, a couple of inflection points. Because everything's got an embedded processor, most things have, they're smart. So that means they run software, and that software is ultimately hackable. But the thing that really changes the equation, if you like, the game changer, is when we start connecting things up. Because what you have then is a kind of a combination between ultra hackability and ultra vulnerability. So how did I get into it? Well, actually, where I started was I've been doing this now. We were established in 2015. At that time, I was leading with an association in semiconductors. So the chair of what was then the National Microelectronics Institute, I was I was a VP of Design Innovation. The chairman came to me and said, "John, do you think we ought to take a look at IoT security?" And I thought, well, that's a bit bizarre, that's left field, and bear in mind he was the CEO of an IoT company, so he was actually seeing the things. And at the time, it was all about innovation, the land that I love and I spent most of my career in. And so, that was a bit bizarre because I knew nothing about security, and I thought, IoT, well, isn't that just an evolution? I started looking at it, and within a very short space of time, it was very clear. And when I did my opening session this morning, I just reminded people where we came from. And back in 2015, the word was egregious when we described the status of IoT security. So that's where we started. That's where I came in. Said something has to be done, and we can't wait. We can't wait for where we're getting to now, which is more standards, more regulation. We needed something here and now. So that's how I got involved, and it was really about, okay, if we need to start addressing the issues of IoT security, we need to really raise an army of developers,
that's a good point,
to really give us the best defense. And so I often talk about what I call the super blue team. Of course, blue being the colour of defence as opposed to red being attackers. And so that's what we set out to do, create a home for IoT security, a place where we could pool knowledge and also distribute it, propagate it as rapidly as we can. And that's what we've been doing for the last 7 or 8 years. And you may have heard me this morning talking about some of the things that we're very proud of. And one of the things that we announced recently was that we just had our 10,000th download of our IoT security assurance framework from our website. Now, 10,000 downloads.
A framework,
That's not bad when you think about how small that it's really targeted at developers. downloaded it all the way across the world.
Yeah.
So that's how I got into it. That's, some of the things that we've been looking at. But I think the other thing that, I always start a conversation with is that, actually, I'll just replay it, what I said this morning. When I think about IoT, what do I see as IoT? And it's to use that phrase that a wise man once said to me. He said that IoT conceptually is an independent, interdependent, complex system of systems.
Yeah.
Which, by the way, is dynamic because it's growing all the time. And as I said this morning, what does that mean? It means it's complicated. Yeah. And the short version, which I always start with, is IoT security is a wicked challenge. Yeah. So we don't ever expect to fully fix it. Yep. But we've got to make it better. We've got to make it at least sufficient for our purposes. It's got to be fit for purpose. And of course, we've got to continually ratchet up and improve our security posture. And that's entirely what today's show has been about. Yep. And that's what the IoT Security Foundation is all about.
It's the core of the Security Foundation, and you've touched on quite a few things. People word it differently. I know Nick Howlett says there's no silver bullet. You never fix it. It's just raising awareness and getting into a place where I think Saab said it's getting into a place where the consumer, the end user, is comfortable with what they're buying effectively, which I think that was his wording or somewhere in here there. Apart from what you've said, which a lot of people are saying, like regulation, that sort of thing, is a challenge. What are the main challenges you would say that we're getting as security at the moment? Is it cost, which will always be a thing in every form of life? Is it just the awareness of it? Is it people turning a blind eye? Is it the speed the technology is moving? Because every day something new is spoken about, S-bombs or 5G or metaverse or whatever it might be. What are the main challenges you would say right now?
Yeah, well, I would add all of those, and I would start by saying that actually what I call the enemies of security. Yes. Yeah. We've spoken before, Brad, and I think I've told you before, I fessed up that I like the power of three. So if I can categorise things in three,
of course.
They work quite well. So the enemies of security, IoT security, cost absolutely huge, even the smallest amount. And let me relate that to standards. So we're a big advocate of free standards, especially for baseline security, because the reality is that there are many standards bodies publishing standards, but they cost. And what you find, and this was news to me too once I got into space, you get a standard, and that references another standard. And before you know it, you've got to buy all these standards and keep maintaining them. Yeah. And even though they're like, 50, 60, 100 quid, $100, it all starts adding up. Yeah. And then when you start looking at multiples, so we've been big advocates of minimising the cost, ideally zero, which is why all of our stuff is free to download. And we've kind of borrowed from the concept of the National Health Service here in the UK that is free at the point of use. Yeah. So that's what we try to do. So cost, absolutely, minimise that. Certainly for baseline standards, maybe not the advanced one, but we would advocate free standards, and that's a big special shout out to the ISO guys. ISO have got a standard coming out, and I think for the baseline, that absolutely needs to be free. Yeah. Convenience. Yeah. Actually, convenience is a bit of a trick. Actually, I had to say convenience, but what I mean is inconvenience. So for anybody who has to go through anything inconvenient to achieve security, just human nature to try to get around it. And we've all heard stories about post-its on computer screens, or what's your password, one person's password, or sharing passwords, or having your common password. Yeah. So convenience. So we have to have sophisticated security. Ideally, we'd like to get rid of passwords. We don't think that they're really suitable in the era of IoT. They were when we had just a few of them. But we've got better. When you look at passwords, it's usually about authentication and authorization, and there are much better ways of doing that, and you can use technology. Yeah. So cost, convenience, and complexity. If it is complex, guess what? That's where problems are going to come in. So those are kind of three areas. But to go back to some of the comments that you've heard from others, we also see that in terms of the global picture, fragmentation is an issue. And what I mean by that is if you look across the regions, each of the regions are coming up with their own frameworks in terms of their standards, in terms of their regulation. And if you put them together, actually they do map quite neatly. So we need some sort of equivalence so that it says that if you satisfy a regulation in this region, actually as a global supplier, you don't need to go back and recertify. So that is a big problem. Of course, that adds a lot of cost, and that cost comes down.
Cost has come up quite a lot, and I think it will, like I said earlier on, in any form of life. I think from what I gather in the conversations I've had, it's okay, so it may cost a little bit now, but if you don't do it, what are the implications of that? How much is that then going to cost you if anything goes wrong?
Well, let's
probably
talk about
a lot more than
let's talk about that too, because I mean, if you don't do security, then again, it's a term I used this morning. You have a security debt.
Yeah.
Because at some point you're going to have to go back and fix that, and that can be a lot more expensive. So better to design it from the start. Make sure you got the security in there from the start. And so again, I think where we were in 2015, it was really about we need to do something now. So best practices, absolutely. We're big fans of them. We're big purveyors of them. We publish lots of best practices, which, as I say, people are using them to great effect. But you know what? As we go forward, that's not going to scale necessarily. So what we need to do is come up and use technology to help us to automate security. Can we make it more resistant to attack? That's the first thing, and of course, best practice helps that. But once you are attacked, and let's say you do get compromised because it's a new kind of vulnerability, a new exploit, then can we use technology to help do some sort of self-healing? And I hope that Nick maybe alluded to this fact that in one of the projects we're doing something around cognitive security. You can start to rationalize about what is there's an issue here, so now we need to start applying different security regimes, or at least flag up there's an issue here. But ultimately, where we want to get to, I think, is this situation where we don't think about security because it's continually assured by the very setup that we have in security. And again, I spoke a little bit about. I just tantalized. People in the conference today have been buzzing, in the rooms about these things. But I think that's where we need to be. That's what we want out of security. I mean, the thing is, it's a fact of life that what is secure today may not be secure tomorrow. So what you really need is some sort of scheme, some mechanism that says when it kind of goes off, when the freshness goes, it keeps itself fresh. So for us, that's a kind of an aspiration. How do you achieve continuous assurance so that we don't have to worry about it? Minimize the cost, the burden. And also, a lot of the way we used to do things to try to achieve that aren't very manual, they're very bureaucratic. So we've got to do away with those. We've got to move ahead. And fortunately, I think there's a lot of thinking, certainly in some of the circles we move in, that to say, okay, we need to start talking about these issues and try to come up with new ways, new methods, new schemes to do that. And the only way you're going to do it with scale is to put it into the technology and automate.
I think that is so important, because if we look back 10 years of what technology was then to what it is now to what it's going to be, there's going to be technologies that we haven't heard of now come about in 10 years time, 15 years time. So it's how can we assure that? Obviously the main one at the moment in the not so distant future is quantum computing, so how that can come in, cryptography, all that sort of stuff. So I think some of the stuff you said on is bang on. Final question then, aside from what you've already said, because you've given quite a lot of advice, so it will be appreciated for sure. If you were to give one final bit of advice for people watching this thinking, right, okay, I really need to understand or to learn or to prevent or whatever it might be that you're thinking about in cybersecurity or Internet of Things or whatever it might be, one bit of advice off the top of your head to pass on.
Well, actually, let me break it down. I'll give you one thing for 3 different groups.
Perfect.
Okay, so if you're a developer, make sure you build secure, make sure you put security in. If you are a user, make sure you buy secure. Make sure you specify security when you're buying. And if you're a regular user, make sure you be secure. And what I mean by that is if you look at who owns security, it's on all of us. So make sure you do the simple things like patch your software and make sure you've got strong passwords, those sorts of things. And that's the important thing. It's not just one thing. It depends where you are in that ecosystem.
It goes back to something that you said at the preliminary that we were at a few months ago. Was there was a story about security at the top of the food chain, but actually, does the installer at the bottom of the food chain understand the security of whatever it is that they're fitting from top to bottom? And I thought that's quite interesting in terms of splitting into those three. But as a business, does your whole business understand security and the implications of what it is they might be installing right at the bottom?
And I think also, it depends. What do you expect of each of those players?
Yeah.
I think what we can say is for manufacturers, we should expect them to understand security and what they need to put in.
Yeah.
So, they're going to need to educate themselves what security is about. But by the time you get to, let's say, an installer, as long as they know how to, put the thing together and configure the thing, then that's fine. They don't need to understand what cryptography is about, what authentication is about. They just need to make sure that they've configured it properly.
Yeah.
So again, in my mind, I kind of have these. If I go from the left of, let's say, the supply chain, from where the technology comes from, into the users, right to the very end user, there's a kind of a big set of guidance here, which kind of goes down like a ramp. So it gets less and less by the time you get to the user, and users shouldn't have to know. In fact, it should work, especially if you're a consumer. It should just work automatically. You shouldn't have to think about it.
Yeah.
It should just work. You should have security by default.
Yeah, you should just be safe and what you're using and understand it, and not be conscious is probably the right terminology of what you're using could go wrong in some
I use the analogy of quality. Again, I've been in the industry for a long time, and I remember back in the day we used to talk about quality and putting these pieces of inspection along the way to make sure you've got quality. Well, in actual fact, that transformed where we had this thing called total quality management, which it just became embedded in all your processes. Yeah. So nobody really thought about quality thereafter. It was assured through the process. Yeah. And that's kind of what I think is akin to security. We need security kind of being assured through the process. And when it gets into the wild, when it's out there operating, that's when we need it to be continually assured in the wild.
100%. Fantastic. Thank you for a start. I think a good place to end with you, John, is a little bit of where we can find you personally, so your social medias, a little bit of where we can find the IoT Security Foundation. And I know it's a good message for you is you're always asking for more people to be involved, more members, more people to help Trevor with the frameworks, whatever it might be. Pass on a message to people watching, and hopefully you can draw some more people in.
Okay, well that's great. Thank you for the opportunity. Right. So you can find us at IoTSecurityFoundation.org or simply just IoTSF.org. You can also find us on LinkedIn if you just search for the IoT Security Foundation. Those are the main places we hang out. And of course, as Brad says, what we need to do is work together. So collaboration is key to us. We're always hungry to bring new members on, whether you want to learn or you want to contribute, then we welcome your support.
Thank you, my friend.
Thank you.
It's a pleasure, and thanks for having us once again.
We do very well.
Very soon.